Have you ever wondered what would happen if your greatest act of kindness was actually a divine test? What if the moment you decided to give everything you had to help a stranger was the exact moment that would change your destiny forever? Today, I'm going to share with you a story that will shake you to your core, a story about a man who had absolutely nothing left to give, yet chose to give it anyway. This is the story of Marcus Thompson, a 34-year-old construction worker from Detroit who lost everything in a single devastating week. His wife left him, taking their 2 young children. His mother died from cancer, leaving him with crushing medical bills. He was evicted from his apartment and fired from his job all in the span of 7 days. But what Marcus didn't know was that his darkest hour was about to become the greatest test of his character. What he did next with his very last meal, his final $5, would set in motion a series of events so extraordinary that even now, 2 years later, people still can't believe it actually happened. This isn't just another feel-good story about helping others. This is about what happens when the universe decides to reward genuine selflessness in ways that defy all logic and explanation. Marcus had been sleeping in his beaten-up 1998 Honda Civic for 3 weeks when this story begins. The Michigan winter was brutal, and every morning he woke up with frost covering the inside of his windows and his breath visible in the freezing air. His last shower had been at a truck stop 4 days earlier, and he was down to his final $5. That morning he sat in the parking lot of a McDonald's, staring at those 5 crumpled bills in his palm, knowing they represented his last meal for who knows how long. His stomach had been empty for nearly 18 hours, and the gnawing hunger was becoming unbearable. He'd already swallowed his pride and applied for food stamps, but the bureaucratic process meant waiting another week. His phone had been disconnected, so he couldn't even call the temp agencies that might have day work available. As he walked into that McDonald's, Marcus made a mental calculation of exactly what he could afford. A McDouble and a small coffee would leave him with 50 cents. Not enough for tomorrow, but at least he wouldn't pass out from hunger today. The teenage cashier looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust, clearly noticing his unwashed appearance and wrinkled clothes. Marcus ordered quietly, handed over his money, and found a corner booth where he could eat in peace and maybe get warm for a few precious minutes. That's when he saw him. An elderly man, probably in his 70s, sitting alone at a table near the window. The man was thin, almost skeletal, wearing clothes that were somehow in even worse condition than Marcus's own. His shoes had holes in them, and his jacket was held together with safety pins and duct tape. But what struck Marcus most was the man's eyes. They held a depth of sadness and resignation that Marcus recognized immediately because he saw the same look in his own reflection every morning. The old man wasn't eating anything. He just sat there, occasionally sipping from a small cup of water, watching people come and go with their meals. Marcus tried to focus on his own food, but he couldn't stop glancing over at the stranger. Every few minutes, the old man would reach into his pocket and pull out what looked like a few coins, count them carefully, then put them back with a defeated sigh. It was clear he didn't have enough money for even the cheapest item on the menu. Marcus knew that feeling all too well. The desperate mathematics of poverty, counting and recounting the same insufficient funds, hoping somehow the numbers would change. The old man's stomach made a loud rumbling sound that carried across the restaurant, and Marcus watched him press his hand against his abdomen with obvious discomfort. Before you continue watching, I need to ask you something that's really important to me and to building this community. I want to know where in the world you're watching this video from right now. Are you in New York, Los Angeles, London, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, Mumbai? Maybe you're in a small town I've never heard of, or perhaps you're from the same city where this incredible story took place. Drop a comment right now and just tell me your city or country. I love seeing how these stories of human kindness reach people all around the globe. It reminds me that no matter where we are, no matter what language we speak, or what culture we come from, we all understand the universal language of compassion. Sometimes I get comments from places I have to look up on a map, and it absolutely amazes me that someone thousands of miles away can be touched by the same story that moves someone right here in my hometown. So please, take a second right now and let me know where you're watching from. I read every single comment, and I promise you seeing your city or country name pop up in the comments section will make my entire day. It helps me understand who's in this community of ours, this family of people who believe that kindness matters and that every act of love, no matter how small, has the power to change the world. Marcus found himself in an impossible internal battle. His rational mind screamed at him that he couldn't afford to help anyone else. He was literally one meal away from complete starvation himself. He had no job prospects, no money coming in, nowhere to sleep except his car, and winter was only getting colder. Every survival instinct he possessed told him to eat his food, mind his own business, and focus on his own desperate situation. But something deeper, something that his recent hardships hadn't managed to kill, kept pulling his attention back to the old man. Marcus remembered his grandmother's voice from when he was a child, telling him that God sometimes disguises angels as people in need, testing our hearts when we think nobody is watching. He had always dismissed those stories as religious fairy tales, but sitting in that McDonald's watching this stranger suffer from the same hunger he knew so intimately, those childhood lessons came flooding back. The old man shifted in his seat, and Marcus caught a glimpse of his wrist. It was so thin that his watch, probably a cheap digital one from years ago, hung loose like a bracelet. The man's cheekbones were sharp and prominent. His skin had that grayish pallor that comes from prolonged malnutrition. Marcus realized with a sick feeling in his stomach that this man was probably in much worse shape than he was. The internal debate raged on for several more minutes. Marcus ate slowly, trying to make his meal last as long as possible while he wrestled with his conscience. He thought about his own children, somewhere across town with his ex-wife, probably eating dinner at that very moment without a care in the world. He thought about all the times in his life when he'd had plenty, when he'd thrown away leftover food without a second thought, when he'd passed homeless people on the street and told himself they'd probably just spend money on drugs or alcohol anyway. Now he was on the other side of that equation, and he understood with crystal clarity how it felt to be invisible, to be judged, to be dismissed as somehow less worthy of basic human dignity. The old man caught him looking and offered a weak smile, the kind of smile that apologized for existing, for taking up space, for being a reminder of how quickly anyone's life can fall apart. That smile broke something inside Marcus. He realized that in this moment, he had a choice that would define who he really was at his core. He could choose fear and self-preservation, or he could choose to be the kind of person he wanted his children to remember him as. Even if they never knew about this moment, even if nobody ever knew, he would know. Marcus made his decision. He stood up, walked over to the counter, and asked the cashier if he could buy a meal for the elderly gentleman by the window. The teenager looked confused and asked if he was sure, probably because Marcus clearly didn't look like someone who had money to spare. Marcus nodded and pointed to the old man, explaining quietly that he wanted to buy him whatever he wanted to eat. The cashier shrugged and called out to the old man, telling him that someone had offered to buy his meal. The old man looked around, confused, his eyes finally settling on Marcus with a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. He shuffled over to the counter, moving slowly with what appeared to be arthritic joints, and stared at the menu board as if he hadn't seen food options in months. His hands shook slightly as he pointed to a Big Mac meal, then quickly changed his mind and asked for just a hamburger and small fries, clearly trying not to take advantage of this unexpected kindness. Marcus insisted he order whatever he wanted. That price wasn't an issue, even though they both knew it absolutely was. The old man's eyes filled with tears as he upgraded to the Big Mac meal and added an apple pie, apologizing repeatedly for the cost. Marcus paid with his remaining money, leaving himself with nothing, not even enough for bus fare or a phone call. As they sat together eating, the old man introduced himself as William, though he said most people called him Bill. He explained that he was a veteran who had fallen through the cracks of the system, that his disability checks had been suspended due to some bureaucratic error he couldn't afford to fight legally. He had been living in a shelter until it closed for renovations, and now he was sleeping in doorways and under bridges, trying to stay warm and find enough food to survive each day. Bill ate slowly, savoring every bite as if it might be his last, which it very well could have been. He told Marcus stories about his time in Vietnam, about the friends he'd lost, about coming home to a country that didn't want to acknowledge what he'd sacrificed. He talked about his daughter who lived somewhere in California but hadn't spoken to him in over 10 years, about grandchildren he'd never met, about a life that had somehow gotten away from him despite his best efforts. Marcus found himself opening up too, sharing his own recent disasters, his fears about the future, his shame about losing everything he'd worked so hard to build. They were two broken men, sharing what might have been their last meal, finding comfort in their shared humanity. What happened next would have seemed impossible if it hadn't been witnessed by several people in that McDonald's. As Bill finished eating, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out what looked like a business card. He handed it to Marcus with shaking hands and said something that would echo in Marcus's mind for the rest of his life. Bill looked directly into his eyes and said, "Young man, you just passed the most important test of your life, and you don't even know it yet." Marcus looked at the card confused. It was elegant, expensive looking, with the name William Henderson III printed in gold letters, along with the title Chief Executive Officer of Henderson Industries. Marcus had heard of Henderson Industries. Everyone in Detroit had. It was one of the largest construction and development companies in the Midwest, responsible for building half the skyscrapers downtown and employing thousands of people. Marcus looked from the card to Bill, then back to the card, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This couldn't be the same person. The homeless man sitting across from him, wearing torn clothes and eating like he hadn't seen food in days, couldn't possibly be the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. But Bill's entire demeanor began to change before Marcus's eyes. His posture straightened, his voice became stronger and more confident, and suddenly the intelligence and authority that had been hidden beneath layers of exhaustion and hunger became unmistakable. Bill explained that once a year, he spent a week living on the streets, experiencing firsthand the reality of homelessness and poverty in his city. He did this not for publicity or tax breaks, but because he believed that no one should have the power to make decisions affecting the poor without understanding what poverty actually felt like. But this year was different. This year, he had decided to conduct an experiment. He had been sitting in restaurants, bus stations, and shelters throughout the week, waiting to see if anyone at all, would show genuine kindness to a stranger who clearly had nothing to offer in return. For 6 days, he had been ignored, avoided, sometimes even insulted. People had stepped over him, crossed the street to avoid him, and looked through him as if he didn't exist. Marcus was the first person in an entire week who had not only acknowledged his humanity, but had sacrificed his own last meal to help him. This is the point in our story where I need to pause and connect with all of you who are watching. I can see some of you in the comments already sharing your own experiences with homelessness, poverty, or unexpected kindness, and it's absolutely moving my heart. But I want to ask you something specific right now. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between helping someone else and taking care of your own needs? Maybe it wasn't as dramatic as Marcus's situation, but we all face these moments where our character is tested. Think about a time when you chose kindness even when it cost you something. Maybe you gave money you couldn't afford to give, or time you didn't have, or energy you needed for yourself. If you've ever made that choice to put someone else's needs before your own, even in a small way, I want you to comment right now with just the words, "I chose kindness." Don't explain the situation, don't give details, just those 3 words. And if you're someone who regrets not helping when you had the chance, if you're carrying guilt about a time when you walked past someone who needed help, comment, "Next time I'll choose differently." Let's fill this comment section with reminders that we all have the power to make these choices every single day, and that it's never too late to decide to be the kind of person who chooses love over fear. Bill continued his explanation, and with each word, Marcus felt his understanding of reality shifting beneath his feet. Henderson Industries wasn't just any construction company, it was the company that had built the very apartment complex Marcus had been evicted from. It was the company that held contracts for most of the major construction projects in the city, the company that could literally change Marcus's life with a single phone call. But more than that, Bill explained that he had been searching for someone specific. Not just anyone who would show kindness, but someone who would do so despite being in desperate circumstances themselves. Someone who understood suffering intimately, but chose compassion anyway. Someone who could be trusted with responsibility, because they had proven their character when they thought nobody was watching and there was nothing to gain. Henderson Industries was expanding, and Bill needed someone to oversee their new community outreach division. Someone who would be responsible for ensuring that their construction projects included affordable housing, job training programs, and support services for people experiencing homelessness. The salary was more than Marcus had ever imagined earning, but more importantly, it was a chance to turn his own painful experience into a way to help others facing the same struggles. Marcus sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he was hearing. Part of him wondered if this was some kind of elaborate prank, if hidden cameras were about to reveal that this was all fake. But Bill's sincerity was unmistakable, and when he pulled out his phone and made a quick call to his assistant, confirming Marcus's identity and background check, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Bill had done his research. He knew about Marcus's construction experience, his work ethic, his recent hardships, even his reputation among former co-workers as someone who was honest and reliable. This wasn't a random act of charity. This was a carefully orchestrated test, and Marcus had passed without even knowing he was being evaluated. Bill explained that he had been watching Marcus for several minutes before their interaction, observing how he treated the McDonald's staff, how he carried himself despite his obvious difficulties, how he looked at other customers with empathy rather than resentment. Every detail had been noted and evaluated, and Marcus's decision to share his last meal had been the final piece of evidence Bill needed. The job offer came with immediate benefits that seemed almost too good to be true. Bill handed Marcus an envelope containing a cash advance of $5,000, enough to get back on his feet immediately. There was also a key to a company apartment that Marcus could use until he found permanent housing, and a company credit card for immediate necessities like clothes, food, and transportation. But perhaps most importantly, Bill offered Marcus something he had lost completely: hope. Hope that his life could be different, that his suffering hadn't been meaningless, that his children might be proud of him again someday. Bill explained that the position would require Marcus to work directly with homeless shelters, food banks, and social services, using his personal experience to design programs that actually addressed the real needs of people in crisis. It wasn't just a job, it was a calling, a chance to transform his deepest pain into his greatest purpose. Marcus would be earning a six-figure salary while doing work that could impact thousands of lives throughout the city. As they prepared to leave the McDonald's together, Bill shared one final piece of wisdom that would stay with Marcus forever. He explained that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or possessions, but in the moments when we choose to see others as human beings worthy of dignity and care. He said that Marcus had been rich all along, even when he had nothing, because he possessed the kind of character that money can't buy and circumstances can't destroy. Bill had built a successful company and accumulated significant wealth, but he had learned that none of it mattered if he lost touch with the humanity of the people his decisions affected. That's why he conducted these annual experiments, why he put himself in vulnerable positions, why he tested not just potential employees, but his own assumptions about human nature. Marcus had reminded him that goodness still exists in the world, that people can choose love even when they have every reason to choose fear, that the capacity for kindness is often strongest in those who have suffered the most. The transformation in Marcus's life was immediate and profound. Within 24 hours, he went from sleeping in his car and having no money for food to having a furnished apartment, a reliable income, and a purpose that gave meaning to all his recent suffering. But the real change wasn't in his circumstances. It was in his understanding of what had just happened to him. Marcus realized that his greatest moment of loss had actually been his greatest moment of victory. When he had nothing left to give, he gave anyway. When self-preservation should have been his only concern, he chose compassion instead. And somehow the universe had been paying attention. Bill later told him that this wasn't the first time he had conducted such an experiment, but it was the first time someone had passed the test so completely, so naturally, without any hint of calculation or expectation of reward. 6 months later, Marcus's life looked completely different. He had been reunited with his children, who were amazed and proud of their father's new career and his dedication to helping others. His ex-wife admitted that seeing him transform his pain into purpose had reminded her of the man she had fallen in love with years earlier. While they didn't get back together, they developed a respectful co-parenting relationship that put their children's needs first. Marcus threw himself into his new role with passion and expertise that surprised even Bill. He developed innovative programs that addressed homelessness from multiple angles, creating not just temporary relief, but pathways to permanent stability. His personal experience gave him credibility with both the people he was trying to help and the donors and politicians whose support was necessary for large-scale change. Within his first year, the programs he designed had helped over 200 people transition from homelessness to stable housing and employment. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus himself. The bitterness and despair that had consumed him during his darkest days had been transformed into empathy and determination. He understood now that his suffering hadn't been punishment, it had been preparation. Every cold night in his car, every humiliating moment of counting insufficient change, every experience of being invisible and dismissed had equipped him to understand and serve others facing the same struggles. He began speaking at conferences and events, sharing his story not for personal recognition, but to challenge others to examine their own assumptions about poverty and homelessness. His message was simple but powerful. The person asking for help today could be you tomorrow, and the person you help today might be the one who saves you when your own world falls apart. The ripple effects of that single act of kindness in a McDonald's continued to spread far beyond what Marcus could have imagined. Bill was so impressed with Marcus's work that he began implementing similar testing programs in other cities, always looking for people whose character had been proven in the crucible of genuine hardship. Marcus became a mentor to other people who had been identified through these programs, helping them transition from survival mode to service mode, from recipients of help to providers of hope. The Community Outreach Division grew into one of Henderson Industries' most successful and respected programs, earning recognition from city officials, social service organizations, and the business community. Local news stations picked up Marcus's story, and it became a powerful example of how individual acts of kindness can create systemic change when they're supported by institutional resources and commitment. 3 years after that life-changing encounter, Marcus received a call that brought his journey full circle. A young woman named Sarah, who was living in her car with her 2 small children, had been identified through one of their outreach programs. She had been caught sharing her last sandwich with an elderly woman at a bus stop, even though her own children were hungry. Marcus personally went to meet Sarah, and as he looked into her desperate but determined eyes, he saw himself 3 years earlier. He offered her the same opportunity that Bill had offered him, a chance to transform her suffering into service, her pain into purpose, her greatest loss into her most meaningful victory. Sarah accepted, and within months, she was developing programs specifically designed to help single mothers experiencing homelessness, bringing insights and innovations that only someone with lived experience could provide. As I finish telling you this incredible story, I want you to think about the power of the choice Marcus made in that McDonald's. He didn't know he was being tested. He didn't know that his kindness would be rewarded. He simply saw another human being in need and chose to help, even when helping seemed impossible. That choice changed not just his own life, but the lives of hundreds of other people who have been touched by the programs he's created and the hope he's shared. Marcus often says that the $5 he spent on Bill's meal was the best investment he ever made, not because of what he got in return, but because of who he became in the moment he made that choice. He discovered that even when we have nothing material to offer, we always have the choice to offer our humanity, our compassion, our recognition that every person we meet is fighting battles we know nothing about and deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Before you click away from this video, I want to leave you with one final challenge, and I want you to respond in the comments. Marcus's story reminds us that we never know when our character is being tested, when our kindness might change someone's life, or when our own greatest need might be met through the compassion of a stranger. So here's my question for you. What's one small act of kindness you could do this week for someone who can't do anything for you in return? Maybe it's buying coffee for the person behind you in line. Maybe it's volunteering at a local shelter. Maybe it's simply taking the time to really see and acknowledge someone who usually gets ignored. Whatever it is, I want you to commit to doing it, and then come back and tell us about it in the comments. Write, "I committed to kindness," and then briefly describe what you're going to do. Let's create a wave of intentional compassion that spreads from this video out into the real world. Remember, you might think nobody is watching, but the universe is always paying attention to how we treat each other when we think it doesn't matter. Your act of kindness might not change your life as dramatically as it changed Marcus's, But I guarantee it will change you, and it might just change everything for the person you choose to help.